go. I don't have a, that's it. All right, perfect. Woohoo! So welcome, party people. Good morning and welcome to Office Hours. This is the first office hours that I've done with my brand new Apple MacBook Pro. I've got one of the M1 silicon chips. So it's not Intel, and so I'm like having to go through and test to make sure that everything actually works. Paul, check out the link up at the top. That's where you ask questions during these sessions. Just because so many questions come in, and I've got to be able. I don't want to lose anybody's question, and I want to make sure that I get a complete history of it. It's not. I love Twitch. That's okay. It's all right. This happens all the time, totally all the time. And I'll tell you what. There's something else that's interesting about that. So I'm starting to do my live streams only on Twitch. And this is the instant replays over on YouTube are really going to make people angry. But you know why I do them on Twitch? The people on Twitch are smarter. It's true. I think that the quality of live attendee on Twitch is so much higher than the quality of the live attendees on YouTube that when you broadcast live on YouTube and you stream on YouTube, that just people find it via the discovery stuff where they don't know anything about SQL Server and they just stumble in randomly. And so this way it helps me kind of focus on a little bit more high quality question and answer interaction as well. I will put the replays up on YouTube after like 48 hours. I'm a Twitch affiliate again, which means that Twitch wants an exclusive on the streams. I decided to do this for both of those reasons. One is to get the higher quality questions, and then the other one to become a Twitch partner again. I used to be one, and I made like $300-400 a month on Twitch, partnership revenue, which isn't small change. I mean, $300-400 a month is real money, but I wanted to get out the word to everybody, and so like Twitch, when you're a Twitch partner or affiliate, you can only live stream. Yes, exactly. It does mean subs. Now, I do have to tell you, I don't have any of the perks set up. Like I just literally finished the affiliate and partner payout stuff this morning. So I want to do a new stream and or new theme and all that to reward subs more, custom emotes and all that. Oh, cool. Andy, good to see you, brother from another mother. I will do I'm only going to do 13 questions. Like I have the 13 questions picked out that I'm going to go through and do because I got a nice, big, huge chunk of them over in PolGab. Because I'd gone a while without streaming. So I thought, okay, I better go through and, actually catch up on some of the streaming stuff. But so I expect things to blow chunks during this session. Like I went to go live, I hit the little hotkey on one of my stream decks to go live, and it's like I get a pop up from Mac OS 10. It's like, sorry, we can't control hotkeys, and I'm like, oh, whoop, too late now. I'm going live. We'll do it live. So we'll go hit the first question that came out. From Office Hours or from PolGab. And this one's really interesting, and I've actually thought about it a lot. Now, doggone it, the hotkey isn't actually working. Hold on a second here. Let me go refresh this just so that I can make sure to show the question. The question is from TheGreatFode, and TheGreatFode says, "Hi Brent, have you ever seen cases?" Oh, SQL Dev DBA, thank you. Oh, that's awesome. I don't have all the cool automatic cheering stuff going on yet with names and pop-ups, so I guess you get that actual personalized one. And SQL Dev DBA has been in here for a really long time too. So TheGreatFode says, have you ever seen cases where low queue depth setting on host bus adapters was a problem and increasing it improved I/O performance? So what TheGreatFode is asking about is if you have your SQL Server in one place, your storage in another box, the host bus adapter is part of the network gear that connects between the two. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, like think 2010, the answer to that question was yes. In the last 10 years, no, because host bus adapter settings, they're the kind of thing that'll get you a percentage improvement, but not an order of magnitude improvement. And the amount of work that you have to do, granted, that setting seems really easy to change, but the amount of work that you have to do politically in order to make that happen and have everybody comfortable with it is really high relative to the small bang for the buck you get. Also, you got to be really, really careful in a fiber optic SAN in a traditional storage area network, not iSCSI, but in a traditional fiber optic SCSI or fiber optic network. If all of the servers or many of the servers set their queue depth too high, you can run into all kinds of problems with retries at the switch level when the fabric gets flooded. I haven't dealt with that in 10 years. Like, I dabbled in SAN administration about a decade ago, and it was enough for me to recognize, oh, there are some settings I probably shouldn't play with by default. Oh, Andy, thank you too as well, sir. Oh, I got to move my buttons around here so that I can be, cheering from y'all from this stream deck over here. I have two stream decks. I have another one down under here, this one over here in front of the subscriber camera, I guess I'll call it, doesn't have some of the cool cheering buttons. I got to go through and fix that. No, I'm going to be watching the replays and going, I need to fix this and this and this. So I'm going to tell you a really long answer version of this because this is a top voted one and it was really highly voted relative to the rest of them. So I'm going to give you an even longer answer and I'm going to use an analogy. Let's say that the Redbeard, thank you as well. The Redbeard 1313, thank you, cheers, welcome in. Let's say you wanted to measure FedEx. I don't have partnership ability or like sponsorships or anything with the brands. I'm just going to pick FedEx. Let's say that you want to measure how fast FedEx was. Well, one way you could do it is you could take exactly one Christmas card. I have my Christmas cards here. I haven't opened them yet, which tells you a lot about me. You could open one Christmas card, drop it off into FedEx, and start a timer. And then you could say that FedEx is as fast as it took for that one item to reach its destination. And you might say, well, FedEx can apparently deliver one envelope a day. But you'd be wrong, of course, because the beauty of FedEx and all package delivery services is that you can throw a bunch of things in the drop box and they will all make it to their destination. So if you had a really low queue depth setting, that's like saying, I'm only going to drop 5 Christmas cards in the box and call it a day. Oh, Spitfire, you're welcome. The higher... Wrong button. Dagnabbit, wrong button. Which is making myself laugh, and that's making me cough even worse. Queue depth settings are how many packages you're going to go drop off in the FedEx Dropbox at once. So you might think, okay, great, I'm going to go throw 5 million in there. Well, you also have to think about the size of the network in between you and FedEx. For example, let's say that I decide to open up a brand new e-commerce store here in my condo building. And I go, I'm going to ship out 10,000 t-shirts and coffee mugs to all of my followers. Well, I guess it'd be like 150,000. I couldn't simply dump 150,000 packages in my building's lobby. FedEx doesn't have a setup that they bring trailers up to the front of my building. So by setting queue depth artificially high, like up in the thousands, you can run into problems where it backfires and the switch network isn't good enough to handle it. So how big of a difference can you expect? Well, if we were talking about FedEx and packages, you could expect a heck of a huge difference. But when you start to talk about storage, not only do you usually, when you need to play around with queue depths and make them higher, you also usually need multiple host bus adapters. Because if you're sending a lot of packages, you want multiple truck lines going back and forth between you and FedEx. The mistake I see people making is they start obsessing over queue depth when they only have like 2 fiber cards or 2 iSCSI cards plugged into the server. And SQL Server usually needs way more than that once you start talking about saturating the storage network. So this isn't something that I have recommended clients change in the last 10 years. In cases where people legitimately needed that, it was also an issue where we had to get multiple host bus adapters installed at the same time. Oh, there's something about a hype train on here. Oh, I can't do that yet. Oh, I have so much to learn about Twitch again. So next up we have NewPadawan. NewPadawan says, "Hey, Brent, Is splitting tempdb still needed on solid state drives? Yes, splitting tempdb has nothing to do with the storage throughput. It has everything to do with an internal implementation in SQL Server about how it accesses certain kinds of system pages. Microsoft never got up off their lazy rears and fixed that, and they gave us kind of a duct tape fix of multiple data files. The pages involved that where we see contention, it's actually not hitting the disk for those. Those pages where we're seeing contention, they're cached up in RAM. So it has nothing to do with how fast or slow the storage is. The problem is that we need more of those pages, and that's why we have to create more data files. Microsoft made a little noise that they were fixing some of this in SQL Server 2022, but they haven't said yet how they're fixing it, so I'm really curious as to see how that goes. Next up, we have BusyIsGood. BusyIsGood says, "Hi Brent, I'm trying to use SPBlitzLock to get recent deadlocks, but it's taking over 30 minutes to produce records. What could be causing this delay?" The place where SPBlitzLock gets its data from is the system default extended events session. And that session might have a whole bunch of deadlocks in it because maybe the only problem that you're having is deadlocks and that whole trace is completely chock full of deadlocks. Or someone might have changed the default retention settings, that starting with, I want to say it was a SQL Server 2016 cumulative update. You could change how much history was kept by default in the system health sessions. And if you crank that way up, it's more data that SPBlitzLock has to churn through. So the ways that you could fix that is you could use the start date and end date parameters on SPBlitzLock to narrow down your filtering window. Or you could set up your own extended event session to monitor for deadlocks and just only roll over after a very short period of time. You can point SPBlitzLock at different extended event session files, so that way then it'll go much faster. Shout out over to SQL Pilot. Thank you, SQL Pilot, for subscribing. Good to see you again. It's been around for quite a while in there as well. So let's see here. Next up, we have LookingAtProcsAllDay. LookingAtProcsAllDay. Well, that's kind of not that far away from my own lifestyle. Hi, Brent. I've seen many different UPSERT patterns. Okay, so if you haven't seen an UPSERT before, obviously LookingAtProcsAllDay has, but if you haven't seen an UPSERT before, that's when we want to hand SQL Server a row, and we want it to update that row if it already exists in the table. If not, insert it. And so every different database platform has different ways of handling UPSERTs. He says, I've seen lots of different UPSERT patterns, everything from if not exists, the merge statement, row lock, whatever. What is your go-to UPSERT pattern in T-SQL and why? If you search for Brent Ozar UPSERT, I want to say that I've still got this blog post, UPSERT. Brent Ozar UPSERT, that's not it. Brent Ozar, if exists, insert. Let's go put the UPSERT in. Nope, that's not it. That's not really good either. Man, how do I if exists check? Let's try for that. That's it. How to check for the non-existence of rows. And I'm going to type this out. How to check for non-existence of rows, just so that it's in the chat there. How to check for non-existence of rows. If you search for that and my name, you'll find the article for it. I'm going to leave that tab open in my browser so that I go add the word UPSERT into there. Is that the right post? That's not really a great post for that either. You know, I don't think that I've really, man, I've got a doc. I'm going to have to go through and dig up on this. I will put it in the show notes on this video when I go through and find it, because I'm disappointed that I don't have the keyword UPSERT inside that post as well. What I basically do is I do an update, and if rows affected equals 0, then I go insert the row. I like that because the update statement runs and only takes out a lock where the row exists. Then you're out and done. You don't have to go check first. You just simply go fire away the update. And if no rows were affected, you're out of there. If you're dealing with multiple rows, I still do the same thing. I go do the update, joining over to the table. Then in the second round, I'll do an insert and say where not exists and join over to the target table. I wish we could use the merge statement, but like SQL Dev DBA says, merge is kind of hilarious and terrifying. If you want to learn more about why we don't use that, search for Aaron Bertrand, Aaron Bertrand, merge statement, and he's got a great rundown of all the problems with the merge statement. All right, next up, what do we have in here? Next up, Soul. Soul says, howdy, sir, tasty be your beverage. I like that. It says, earlier this century, it was like, MaxDOP at 50, Brent wrote this, who's Brent? And now it's more like, oh, whatever Brent writes, he's more and more wise. Are you, by giving more and more to the community, are you afraid of being the default? I don't mind being the default if I'm right. What I worry about is being the default and being outdated or wrong. So if I have blog posts, and the way that I usually, because I have like thousands of blog posts out there, all on BrentOzar.com, the way that I kind of monitor for that is whenever someone leaves a comment on a blog post, I'll go through and do a sanity check and go, is that blog post still accurate? Or is there anything that I need to go change about it or delete it? I've deleted blog posts over the past few years where I'm just like, well, this thing is outdated. And if somebody's finding it to comment on it, then that means people are actively reading it. And I just don't want this thing out there. Or I'll go rewrite it in a newer way to make it more relevant. That's also why I wouldn't sell BrentOzar.com outright. Like I wouldn't just sell it and let someone take over the content management, because my worry would be that they would let the thing rot. There was a really reliable, awesome SQL Server advice site out for a really long time that had articles and performance tuning tips. And a company bought it and used it just for ad hosting. They left the SQL Server content the way it was, and they just put ads all over it. And then the original author was just heartbroken because the content got further and further out of date, and the company who owned it refused to keep it up to date. So that's my fear of about becoming the default. But otherwise, I always want to blurt out, I don't know something. When it's a question that's in here and I'm like, I have no idea what the answer is. Go see this other resource instead. Like Andy happens to be in here, Andy Leonard. Whenever anybody asks an SSIS or Azure Data Factory question, I'm like, just go see Andy Leonard, Catherine Williamson, to point people to a better resource than I am on issues. That's also why I refuse to do training on MySQL and Postgres. I use both of those. I use MySQL and Postgres. I don't know them well enough that I would ever want to, I don't want to say ever, but I don't want to have my name on a post with advice. Because people take my name pretty seriously for SQL Server. I wouldn't want them to think that I have that same credibility on other database platforms in the year 2021. I'm not saying it'd never happen, but it's not going to happen in the year 2021. Next up, username, I use lowercase for select. That's excellent. I use lowercase for select says, hi Brent, my friend who's also my customer has a 100 gigabyte database and a terrible app that uses select star from table from every query. Performance is table, and now he wants me to use ephemeral disks for data and log files. Can you express for me how bad of an idea that is? I have clients using them all the time. In the cloud, servers will fail. In AWS, EBS volumes will disappear. In Azure, premium storage and ultra storage will disappear. It happens less often than ephemeral disks, but it's all about how much you're willing to gain in terms of performance and how much you're willing to sacrifice in terms of reliability. So what I've often found when working with customers is that we can set up something like an always-on availability group or database mirroring or log shipping, depending on their tolerance for failure, in order to get insanely fast speed with ephemeral storage. It's not my first choice. It's not your first choice. You want your data to be chiseled into marble slabs at an incredible speed, like you want an army of people back there making your data on permanent, unbreakable stuff. The problem is that marble's really expensive and labor's really expensive. So just like permanent storage in the cloud is really, really expensive, especially if you're going to chisel that stone really quickly, that's when you have to start making compromises. So what I would do is at 100 gigs, I think that's so small. I'm gonna be a little brutally honest here. At 100 gigs, it's real easy to make that pig fly. Get RAM. Put 100 gigs in memory and you're done. And you don't have to have that terrifying reliability conversation because most of the database will be cached. So I always kind of chuckle when people are like, I've got a big database. And I'm like, oh, you mean like that would fit on a USB thumb drive 10 times over? So just be careful about it. 100 gigs, you could cache that whole thing in RAM. Next up, Lostindb asks, hi Brent, I used to put MDF and LDF on separate physical disk locations. Is that still needed when we use SSD? That wasn't even needed when we had magnetic. And if you search out for Google Brent Ozar separate data and log file drives, I've got a post debunking that reliability myth. It never made sense. So it is totally safe to put both data and log files on the same volumes. Read that post thoroughly and show it to anybody who wants to argue with you. And what they inevitably say at the end is, well, I just want to do it that way. Okay, as long as you just want to do it that way, I don't care what kind of fetishes you have. I don't mind if you wear a furry suit to work. It's cool. I support that kind of thing. But just don't think that wearing a furry suit is going to make you perform better. Guess it depends on what your job is. Next up, RelationalDBA says, hey Brent, love your office hours videos. Awesome, glad you like them. If you were a production database administrator, what would your approach be to monitor always-on availability groups? Buy a monitoring tool. Buy a monitoring tool. It's just that simple. Monitoring tools are cheap. Your time is expensive. SQL Server is just not that inexpensive where it doesn't make sense to have monitoring tools. Go get a monitoring tool. Renegade Larson, thank you. Good to see you around too as well. Renegade's been around for a really long time too. Windraven says, I always put data and logs on different drives for I/O throughput, never reliability. Okay, think about that for a second. When do you need to read from both at the same time or write to both at the same time? When are you going to max out the throughput on both data and logs at the same time? If your answer is, well, when I load data, I want it to go in fast, you don't understand how inserts, updates, and deletes work. Inserts, updates, and deletes need to make it to the transaction log immediately, but the data pages are cached in RAM for up to 60 seconds and then flushed out to disk asynchronously after your transaction has long been passed. If you're thinking about reading data for selects, you don't read data for selects from the log file. So in day-to-day operations, separating those two onto separate volumes for throughput doesn't buy you jack. Now, I would say if you have really terrible decrepit storage, there's a possibility you might want to do that. But generally, Windraven says giant 2 terabyte databases. Still, with 2 terabyte databases, even if you do big bulk loads, you're not writing to both of those at the same time or reading from them at the same time. Plus, when you start to move up in the cloud, the amount of bandwidth that you get, the throughput to your storage, is based on how large the drive is. So the larger the drive is, the more throughput you get. That's why you tend to want to use one large volume rather than carve up a bunch of tiny ones, which end up being dead slow. Now, of course, there are situations, everybody's situation could be different. Windraven could be absolutely seeing huge, massive performance improvements, but I just always want to push back on that assumption and go make sure that you're talking about specific operations where you actually need that, because inserts, updates, deletes, and selects, you don't. So Next up, Accidental DBA asks, Hi Brent, sometimes when we run spblitz first with no arguments, it runs for several minutes. Is this something to be concerned about? So let's zoom back a little and ask, what do you do when any query is slow? What I like to do is I like to run a monitoring query like spblitzwho or spWhoisActive that shows me which queries are running right now, what they're waiting on, and what their execution plan looks like. So rather than give you a loaf of bread and tell you, here's exactly what's going on inside there, what I'd rather do is teach you how to bake bread. Boy, bread sounds like it smells really good right about now. Or maybe I'm just smelling bread out of nowhere. But go use spWhoisActive or spblitzwho. And then that way you'll be able to see which query is running right now and what it's waiting on. A whole new world. Next up, we have Stuart. Stuart says, Hi, on SQL Server 2016, I have a query using an outer join to an empty column store index table to benefit from batch mode. If I remove the outer join to the column store table, it gets a very different plan and no batch mode, so it seems that this is useful on 2019. Any thoughts? So the thing that I've noticed a lot, and Stuart, this doesn't apply to you. You're savvy enough that you understand how to read the execution plan you're looking at and measure things like logical reads, statistics time, and looking whether you got row or batch mode. Most people don't even know to do that. You're savvy enough that you can tell for sure that it's actually helping your query. What I see in most cases is that people do that as kind of like a lucky penny approach. They're like, when I hold my lucky penny in my left hand and I pull the slot machine, I win more often. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how that works. So I am not a fan of teaching people that technique because it can change with every cumulative update and every version of SQL Server. When I touch a query, I want to make it better long-term permanently. I don't want to have to go back to that query again because I wrote the whole thing with the lucky penny technique, hoping that it's going to work every version that hits. I am okay with you doing it. It can make things faster, just like sometimes joining to an empty table or having changing where exists to a subquery. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do that will change the shape of the execution plan. And in the Fundamentals of Query Tuning class, we talk about how to see how much time SQL Server spent building the execution plan, what routes it went down to consider building different plans. My guess is that you're getting an early termination of statement optimization, and that by adding that left join, it's just triggering SQL Server to spend more time thinking about statement optimization. The only other thing I would say too is you could be on Standard Edition. If you're on Standard Edition doesn't get batch mode on row store unless you join to an empty column store table. But I think you're savvy enough to have already guessed that, though, so I'm just going to mention it just to be clear. Let's see. Next up, Stuart again. Stuart again says, Hi, Brent. I recently created a high-value missing index on a single computed column according to spblitz_index. When I check the index usage stats, it's not been used at all. Any thoughts on why that might be? Yes, and I talk about them in my Mastering Index Tuning class. In my Mastering Index Tuning class, which just happens to be on sale right now through the end of November, you can go find out why SQL Server recommends indexes that it will never end up using. I'll tell you how to interpret the missing index recommendations. They are just a comma-delimited list of columns to consider indexing. They're not actually in the correct order. So if you check out my Mastering Index Tuning class over at brentozar.com/Black Friday, you can learn much more about that. Now, back to our regularly scheduled show, if I can figure out which button to push. It's been so long, I can't remember which leg of the rubber clown suit goes on first. Next up, Ivan asks, is it necessary to rebuild an index which had page counts over 500 and fragmentation more than 50% daily or weekly should be fine? Ivan, that's a great one to actually end on. What I'll do is I'll say go to my YouTube channel, search for Brent Ozar fragmentation, and I have a couple of different videos out there explaining how to tell what the two different kinds of fragmentation are, which one really matters, and why you're not seeing any performance improvements when you're rebuilding indexes every day. So go over to go over to YouTube, search for Brent Ozar fragmentation, and I've got a whole, it's like a 60-minute long videos. One of them, another one's like 30 minutes long, where I go into detail on that. So thanks. sql says, I'm pretty sure you just said you're going to put on your Clippy suit. I don't think I have the arms in here. I know the body of the suit. Yeah, no, both the body and the arms of the suit are in my other closet, are in my the master bedroom closet, which seems kind of goofy that I would keep that around on a daily basis. I really should have it inside this office, but just so that I could pull it on, like that I could just disappear off the screen real quickly and then step right back on with Clippy. All right, so I will stop here. Wow, I'm just tickled pink that the subscription stuff is working, that the Apple's been able to stream the whole time. Oh, it's the new MacBook Pro 16-inch with the M1 Max processor. The thing that I love about it is I don't hear a single pin drop of noise coming out of the laptop. That there's no fan noise at all, even though I'm streaming with a 4K camera hooked up there, a 4K camera hooked up over there, and so forth. A drop table employee says, well, good to see you again, too. Is there a special reason they're in the bedroom closet? Oh, my God. Make me laugh. I haven't had my asthma medicine yet today, so now whenever I laugh that hard, I'm having to cough bad. It's the only place that I end up keeping all my costume type stuff. I should totally put it in here because I have enough space. So now what we'll do is we will go raid Andy's channel. Let's figure out how we're going to do that because I'm not exactly... Oh, there it is. There's a button for raid Andy's channel. So pick channels you follow, and I will start a raid over to Andy's channel. Andy Leonard is out of Farmville, Virginia. So hopefully I got the accent there right when I said that, Farmville, Virginia. He does all kinds of ETL work, moving data around from place to place, and is just a sharp guy to learn from as well. So I will pass it over to Andy, and I'm going to go do some Black Friday shopping, actually. I bought my first Costco membership, and so now I have to go actually turn in my driver's license and all that stuff. And they have a really good deal on gaming laptops. There's like an MSI GE76. It's like $1,000. It's like $1,100, and it's like a $1,700 laptop. Has a 3060 in it, so I'm like, okay, 17-inch display. It's really sharp. All right, so I will launch y'all over to Andy, and I will see y'all later. Adios, folks. And it's counting down, ready to raid in 5 seconds. I don't think I've done this in forever. Let's see how this works. Ready to raid. Raid now. And there it goes.